All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D, and today we are continuing the holiday series on Back to First Principles. Today we're going to look at what is thriving vice surviving. Other than just a cool moniker that you hear all the time, what does it actually mean? So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverages. Let's get at her. A good beat. No one denies a good beat. Thanks again for joining us here at Inside My Canoe Head. We appreciate all of the messages you leave us at our website, www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, we like them all. Please keep them coming. This is your podcast. This is our message to you, free of charge. Always will be free of charge. Along with our writing on Substack and our YouTube channel, this is how we communicate with you. Free, non-apocalyptic, evidence-based preparedness education for rational people for free for you as part of our bigger community service here at our parent company of Preparedness Labs Incorporated. Now, we're carrying on this cool holiday season process as we all enjoy the festivities, World Junior Hockey Tournament, whatever it is you might be doing. Today, we want to talk about thriving, not just surviving. Now, we hear that all the time. Hey, everybody says the goal of preparedness is just that. We want everybody to thrive, not just survive. Well, first of all, let's look at the back end of that comment. What is survival? Survival simply means that you are still alive at the other end of the event. So whatever the disruption may be, whatever the problem presented is, whatever disruption occurs to knock you off your normal life operations. Because really, an emergency happens when something requires you to alter what your normal life would be. So however you get up and get after it, however you slay your dragons, whatever your day looks like, an emergency causes you to pause that for a second to have to deal with something different. And significant disruptions can put, if not protected by a preparedness plan, can put significant changes into your day. So survival is just the efforts you undertake to ensure you actually live to the next day. And that has always been the foundational grounding of what we refer to as the public sector resident-facing preparedness communications. We know that the current message of have a kit, have a plan, be informed is a morphing or not really an advancement. It's more of a morphing of the civil defense message from the 1960s, right? So it was about training you to survive a nuclear attack. That message, for some reason, has been retained largely unchanged for some number of decades now, even though we live in a modern, technologically advanced society, and the issues we face are not ones that can be addressed by a message of have a plan, make a kit, and be informed. That message has grounded in the idea is that what the government's trying to do is create professional victims, right? They're making the assumption from the get-go is that you will be affected by the disruption. You will be hurt by the disruption. It will cause you to stop being able to do what you want. So really, when you follow the government message that's out there, it's simply telling you to survive. Sit down, huddle with your flashlights and your unprepared food and your bottles of water and your crank radio and wait for the day to be saved by the big, wonderful government. It's part of the savior complex, right? So we know that message is grounded in survival and just surviving, and it's grounded in things that have long since gone away. Now, I've written at length and posted many podcast episodes about the sunk cost fallacy and the reason why I believe communication experts within the emergency management community are holding on to this concept for dear life. Now, we are chipping away at the edges. We start to see some, not really a paradigmatic change yet, but we start to see people realizing that that message, if ceased now, would cause no harm or damage to the population, and that it is summarily being ignored by all that listen to it. Setting that aside, that's survival. Survival is just, if you follow the government message and do what the government says, you probably have a reasonably good chance of survival. But let me give you this data. No one in North America in the last 20 years of data that I've looked at, and I don't know anybody who's examined more data on survival through disasters at the preparedness level on individuals and households. Nobody has starved to death. Nobody has died of lack of access to potable water. The two leading things that people talk about in the public sector resident-facing preparedness communications are telling you to do things that are zero correlated, and I mean absolute zero correlated, to successful outcomes, right? If you had no water and no food for 3 days, you'd still be alive. You'd be grumpy, don't get me wrong, but you'd be alive. Having the flashlight, having the food, having the water, having the crank radio, none of that makes you thrive. All of that does is make you survive, and you can survive just fine without any of that. Now, the question is, and this is part of, carrying on with our personal responsibility conversation from last time, do you want to do more than survive? Right? If all you really want to do is just make it through the other end of whatever's going to punch you upside the head, get up, dust yourself off, and carry on with life, then really you don't need to do anything. And preparedness is probably not something that is keen and interesting to you as an individual. However, if you'd prefer not to get punched upside the head every time a disruption happens in society, and your choice, which you would rather prefer, would to be able to carry on, this is what preparedness offers. Now, preparedness, we've said many times, and this is my moniker, preparedness is a lifestyle, not a stockpile. It is impossible for you to purchase your way to preparedness. Now, there are some real and very specific times in developing your preparedness plan where you will find a capability gap in something that you would like to be able to achieve as part of your preparedness plan, and realize that there is a resource that's missing and you may actually have to purchase something. But you'd only be purchasing something very specific and very well defined, and as a result of a hole that you found in your capability that you want to be able to deliver as part of your preparedness plan. So you can't buy your way to preparedness. Preparedness is free. Now, we saw some recent results come out of the province of Alberta and other places in Canada, where one of the number one barriers cited by people in the survey to adopting preparedness was cost. I've argued and written again at length in the past that there are no financial barriers to preparedness. That's because you can't purchase your way there. And that the financial barrier itself is a creation of the state, because it is the state who is telling you to buy things, and that you need to buy the following things for an emergency kit to become prepared to be able to survive through a disruption. Because the state is telling you you require goods off of a shelf, and because a great number of families in today's economy are struggling to make ends meet, they will see that and cite that as a reason not to adopt preparedness, misunderstanding that there is no acquisition requirements to adopt a prepared life. There is no list of things that you need to have at home to be prepared, and that preparedness is a lifestyle, and your shelter in place hand, you already have everything you need. Why? Well, I'm going to just a cute joke from my last podcast, and I'll continue it here. You're still here, right? You live at home. So when the lights go out and the gas turns off, you will be perfectly fine. It'll be a little disruptive, sure, but you'll be fine because you were fine before. But the idea about preparedness is it is not for you to survive. If you're just looking to survive, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. If you're looking to thrive, now we need to define what thriving is. Thriving is having minimal to nominal effect on your normal daily operations. So it means that you have designed a life with precautionary measures embedded to where, irrespective of what exogenous shock happens, you are capable of carrying on with however your normal life dictates. Like I told before, however you go out there and slay dragons, however you pursue, when you choose to thrive, you've built a preparedness plan that ensures that no matter what that exogenous shock is, within a reasonable limit, you'll be fine. It actually doesn't affect you. And that's the goal of preparedness, right? The goal of preparedness is to provide that insulation against the event, which means you will carry on with your normal daily schedule, you will carry on with your normal activities, and you will carry on with your normal life with very nominal disruption in the middle of chaos that is causing other people to lose their you-know-what, to run around in circles, to be texting the world, to be begging the government for help. All those people are out there doing that, and you are carrying on with normal operations. Reasonably, very nominal disruption. Nobody's disruption free, but very nominal disruption against your normal operations. That's what preparedness does for you, right? It's not about making it's not about making your little shelter cove in the basement of your house happier. It's about setting up your life so you have very little disruption. And how do we do that? Well, we've always had the moniker, and you've heard this on the podcast a couple of times, is the lone wolf perishes and the pack survives, right? When we talk about individual personal responsibility, as we did in the previous episode, that's often equated to you're on your own. And part of the communication issue that we have, that I personally have as a researcher and a professor in emergency management, with the way communications are done from the public sector to the residents, is the unit of measure. And what I mean by unit of measure, it's directed at the individual and the family. So the government is trying to make 200 families on a street prepared. They're not trying to make the street prepared. Those are two different things. Now, it's often confused when I talk about personal responsibility. Sometimes the confusion is made that I'm just trying to create little groups of, little households of preppers all around. No. Thriving is about understanding that you as a human animal do not do well on your own. That your sense of community, your sense of belonging to a tribal group, your bonded social capital, if you want to be theoretically correct, is your success. Your social networks are your emergency kit, right? So your social networks and your relationships with the people in immediate proximity to you in your neighborhood are far more important than any kit or equipment you could put in your basement. And if you want to thrive, you can only do so in a group management setting. So now we're not trying to create 200 little prepper homes on a street. What we're trying to do is create a resilient street. We're trying to create a resilient community. The unit of measure to keep resiliency at its highest level and to keep people prepared is the community. Because then not everybody has to have everything. Not everybody needs to know every skill. Not everybody needs to have knowledge about everything. What you have is a body and a community and a tribe that works together on each individual's strengths. Because as humans, and you can go back and look at the psychological and the anthropological literature on this, tribes worked in the past not because everybody knew how to do everything. This wasn't a Delta Force or a Navy SEAL Team 6. This was individuals who had strengths and skill sets that individually on their own they likely would have perished. But when you take the carpenter and the blacksmith and the healer and the builder and the farmer and the sheep raiser, and you start putting all of these skills together in a tribal sense, what happens is they all work together as a mesh network of support systems. And from that, you build a strong, resilient community. Not individually, you don't do very well, and in fact, you likely perish. But when you bring the tribe together, people survive and they thrive. You thrive because of your access to social networks, not your access to kit in your basement. And this is not my belief. Well, actually, it is my belief and it is my opinion, but it's based upon a decade of research that I did. In fact, I wrote my PhD dissertation on this in 2022, and you can hop over to my website, preparednesslabs.ca. There's a link to a book. You can go on Amazon. You could buy my PhD or dissertation, support me, or you could look it up. But I've spent a decade researching social capital. I'm on the board of I'm the secretary of the board of directors of the International Social Capital Association, and I run the special interest group on disaster resilience. I've studied social capital and human relationships. It is the key. When we look at evidence from Professor Aldrich's books, from Robert Putnam's research, and we go all the way through Harvard professors, Northeastern University professors, you look all around at the body of academic literature, whether you're a nerd or not like me, and you read academic literature, it is clear the well-connected communities have far better post-event outcomes, whether it's 200 years ago in Japan or whether it is this year in North Carolina, in the Adirondack Mountains. The communities that will do better are those with a sense of belonging, a sense of trust, a sense of place, where people are bending over backwards to go help their neighbor and their brethren because they would not dare leave them on their own. That sense of community, that's thriving, and it doesn't happen on your own. So as you understand personal responsibility to mean you take charge of your own outcomes, it's then extrapolated to mean to do so, I'm going to look at the evidence that's in front of me, and the evidence says it's not about stockpiles in my basement, but it's about social networks of other human beings with different skill sets, knowledge, and capabilities that together as a group, we are far more resilient than we could ever be on our own. The key to thriving in preparedness, not just in a natural disaster sense. And I want to be clear about this point because I think it's really interesting at how most of the preparedness discussion that happens in the world is zeroed in on natural disasters. Now, I know the researchers and the UNDRR get bent out of shape when people use the phrase natural disasters. I could care less. People understand what they are. When you think of disasters, when you think of earthquakes, when you think of floods, when you think of tornadoes, what do people think? People think that that is a disaster. And I get it. Absolutely. That's 20%. If you've ever heard of the Pareto problem, is often it says that 80% of your problems come from 20% of events. And so understanding that preparedness itself in the sense of a natural disaster or a natural hazard being realized represents only 20% of the preparedness spectrum. That's it. That's all it is. We call it the gateway, almost like a gateway drug. We get our preparedness curriculum that we use here at Inside My Canoe Ed and Preparedness Labs Incorporated gets people to understand through personal responsibility, through learning to thrive, through building a social network, and following the education plan that's in our online video course, which is available over at www.preparednesslabs.ca. It is only $199 Canadian, and it comes with 4.5 hours of education. Now, this is non-apocalyptic education based upon evidence. This isn't the prepper crap you see on YouTube. This is somebody like me and a research team looking at hundreds of years of post-event data and deciding what steps you should take to actually mirror what people did to be more successful. We've built the education curriculum on that. There's a number of simple Excel spreadsheets to help you out. And on top of that, when you do take the course, you get entrance into our monthly webinars. Now, starting in January 2025, these monthly webinars will be in your famous 30-30 format. That means a 30-minute format of myself talking about the latest issue in preparedness, the top things that have happened in the last couple of weeks, and what you should be considering for this monthly preparedness review. The next 30 minutes are all about your questions and answers. That webinar is free 12 times a year to you simply as a benefit and a bonus of enrolling in the course. So drop over to www.preparednesslabs.ca and check it out. So understanding the preparedness from a natural disaster sense is just that first 20%. And once we get people carefully seated in there, they've completed their trifecta of preparedness plans, they're ready to shelter in place, they're ready to evacuate, they've got a solid strategy for their economic protection for when they get fired and their income disappears overnight. When those basics of preparedness is done, now we start to look at your broader world, right? Now we have to consider, what is your political exposure? What is your economic exposure? What is your cultural exposure? And what is your familial exposure? Those are the other 4 fields of preparedness that make up the Pareto, the other part of the Pareto. We live in a world where politics is on fire, right? It doesn't matter what country you're in. France is in precarious position. Germany's in a lot of trouble. Canada is a disaster, and America's getting Trump for 4 more years. It doesn't matter what you feel about them, right? Because I have listeners on this podcast that can call themselves Republicans and Democrats. I call myself a libertarian. Some are liberal, some are conservative, some are socialist. I even have some listeners who email me who are diehard Marxists, right? The point is, it doesn't matter what your ideology is, right? We all have a political and economic philosophy that we think is good and healthy for the world. The reality of preparedness tells you when you move past natural disasters to say, you exist in a world like this. We're incorporating this in a lesson of a course that we're launching over Christmas. It's probably going to be out the 1st of January for solopreneurs and people who own small home-based businesses. How do they incorporate business continuity, which is emergency preparedness for a business, into their business when it's normally several $1,000s for a report or several $100 an hour for a consultant to come in and give you some advice. So we're putting together and going to launch this incredibly small course for $199 Canadian and a lot less American because of the conversion rate on how to protect your company. The reason being is, as I said, you live in a political world and an economic world. It may not look like the one that you want, but that doesn't matter. Nobody cares. I mean, you probably care. I care. Okay. But if you're an American, Donald Trump's going to be the president for the next 4 years, and you're going to have to deal with it. So our suggestion from a preparedness perspective is you've got to look, okay, this is likely what the landscape is going to look like. These are likely the activities that are going to occur. This is likely the potential thrusts of the economic picture over the next 4 years. And in all of that, whether I agree with it or not, what are the opportunities? What are the opportunities I can personally or economically seize in the middle of that and capitalize on? What do they look like? That's what we try to do in the preparedness education as we move beyond natural disasters. We start to get you to understand how to position yourself, your family, your business. Because remember, you may not be a business owner, but you probably earn an income. Unless you're an absolute guaranteed retiree from a government pension that no matter what happens to the economy, it doesn't go away. Because remember, a lot of people are on great pensions from companies, and then those companies go bankrupt and your pension disappears at 72, and now you have no money. So how do you position yourself and your community and your business in the world that we exist in a political and economic spectrum, right? How do you ensure the protection of those assets and the capitalization of opportunities that exist? Now, culturally and ideologically, we have a lot of struggles in our world today. I'm not going to take one side or another on, because it doesn't matter. Again, this is very similar to the political and economic viewpoint in that as you see cultural and ideological changes happening around you, some you'll agree with, some you may not agree with, but you're not in a position to stop it or roll it back. Or if you support it, to make it happen any faster, right? You're a singular voice. Again, so it's looking through the lens of what is this likely to lead to? How will it affect me? And if any of these events are going to negatively affect me in my business, in my life, in my economic picture, how do I protect against that? What are the steps I can take to mitigate the effects of something? For example, if you're sitting in Canada and you run a company that exports to the United States of America, and the majority of your income is from the America, you're about to get hit with 25% tariffs, right? Which is going to dramatically reduce the amount of Americans who are going to buy your product. If you're not already have the strategy to fix that, you're too late. That's the point. That's where understanding your political and economic exposure to the world around it. Nobody cares whether you agree with the tariffs. In fact, it doesn't matter. You can have a personal pity party all day long, but it won't change the fact that this is about to occur. So the cold, hard truth of the matter is, what are you going to do about it to protect your corporate assets? Even if you don't own the company, what if you work at one right now? You work at a Canadian production plant that 85% of the products are exported to the United States of America in the general category marketplace, general goods and services marketplace. You got to be seeing the writing on the wall, right? If you think that job is going to be untouched in a year from now, you're smoking crack, my friend. I'm not saying quit your job, and I'm not saying you'll get fired. Obviously, I can't see the future. But again, this harkens back to your responsibility to understand that there is a new threat. There's a new potential change in the future that may impact me. How am I going to get ready for it, right? This goes back to when I spoke earlier about the trifecta of preparedness plans, right? The third trifecta is your economic plan, and it basically called when you're fired. What is your plan if you get fired tomorrow? Right? It doesn't matter why. Who cares why? You get fired tomorrow. Tomorrow is whatever day of the week, and your income stops, and your job's gone. What's your plan? What is your plan today when that happens? Because if you don't have one, and you're in a factory, and all of you get fired, and none of you have plans, you're all screwed, right? And you did nothing wrong. I get it. It's not your fault, but it's also not somebody else's job to come rescue you. I'm sorry, but that's just the blunt truth. It's your responsibility to figure out, if you lose your job, if you get fired, what are you intending to pivot to? How are you going to earn that income? What training is required? How do you get that training? And maybe it's a good idea to learn it on YouTube in your spare time periodically so that there's less of a downtime as you pivot to a new economy, right? Remember what happened in the pandemic, and I bring this up all the time. How many people out there listening to this podcast simply sat on the couch and waited for life to turn back to normal? How many of you did that? Assuming that some magical external force would come flying in and put the world back the way it was before, right? People just sat at home. And when they did, they said, hey, listen, why isn't anybody giving me free stuff? Why? And then everybody turned. The government needs to give me money. The government needs to help me pay my bills, blah, blah, blah. People were not ready to navigate a significant disruption, except they were. There was a group of prepared people who did very well in the pandemic because they knew their next step. When they got fired, and they did nothing wrong. This is great people doing wonderful work at healthy companies that do actions totally outside their control. They were fired. They had their pity party. They had their overnight pity party. They poured themselves in the bottle of wine. They got up the next day and they got after it. They executed their plan. And within a very short period of time, they were up and running and earning an income in a new field. It might have been temporary until their old one resurrected. But what they most certainly didn't do is sit around and wait for the world to right itself. That's the difference with preparedness. It's not about you sitting around doing nothing. It's about you setting up a plan for being successful. So when you look at political, you look at cultural, you look at economic, you look at ideological, you start to see that there are a lot of potential outside influences, especially in the chaotic decade that represents the 2020s, that are ongoing that may, and it's potential, may influence how you intend to live your life, how you want to live your life. And that's the goal of preparedness. That's the goal of thriving in preparedness, is moving beyond the individual, changing the unit of measure to your community, building a thriving community. Even if it's just your street, that's fantastic. And then moving on beyond that, and then looking at your exposure to all of these other externalities that may impact how you want to do your life. How do you want to live your life? How do you want to change your dreams? Because remember, we keep saying, and it's a strong moniker that I use all the time on this podcast, that the role of preparedness is to facilitate you chasing your dreams and rocking an incredible life. Why? Because as the world comes up and tries to punch you upside the head, preparedness is that big inflatable bag that surrounds your head, and it can punch you all day. You'll feel slight little shocks, maybe a little bit of pain every once in a while, but you're just carrying on. You're walking forward. You're chasing your dreams. Everybody around you is in chaos. They're getting punched in the head. They're getting knocked down. They're getting back up. They're getting an uppercut. They're dropping on their arse. It's a nonstop brouhaha battle, and you're walking through the middle, taking very little lumps, chasing your dreams because you took the time to wrap your life in a blanket of preparedness. And again, this is not, it doesn't cost you any money. Moving beyond that personal commitment to being responsible for your outcomes, to learning how to thrive, and setting you, your family, and your neighborhood, and your community, and your faith community, and whatever wider organizations you belong to, ready to go. I know it's difficult to go up to your neighbor. Hey, how's your preparedness level today, my friend? It's not something that really pops up in conversation. Somebody has to start. And this starts from a champion. And we're going to close out the podcast today on this. To thrive, you need a champion. Somebody has to stand up in the neighborhood and say, hey, this is something I'm concerned with. This is something I think we can all benefit from getting together and talking about. Who's interested? And imagine if you had a street of 100 homes and 5 people said, I'm interested. And they showed up at your garage one day and you sat around over some libations and just talked in general about what would it look like if? What would we think would be the biggest issue if? What do you think our biggest needs in this neighborhood would be if? Who are our vulnerable and marginalized populations within this neighborhood that may need extra assistance? You're having a conversation that wasn't possible until you initiated. Now, maybe you're not the extrovert to do that. Fair enough. Maybe you're not the individual, but I'm sure you know somebody who is like that, who is an extrovert, who would not mind taking that bold step and creating that preparedness conversation. To just say, hey, I think this is something we should consider. I think this is something we should talk about. Somebody out there, trust me. And I had this wonderful conversation with somebody over the weekend. And everybody thinks they're crazy. I'm thinking about preparedness. I'm a crazy nutcase in my basement. Well, you're not a nutcase, but don't worry, you're not the only crazy nutcase on the street. I can almost guarantee you, from the body of research I've looked at from a decade, you are most certainly not the only one in your community, on your street, and in your neighborhood, at least mildly or reasonably concerned about preparedness and want to get together with somebody else to talk about the issues, because we know the public sector resident-facing communication is pretty much useless and is grounded in theories that are well over 3 decades old, summarily ignored, and not being listened by anybody. It's about building your community resilience, understanding each other's needs, getting together. That's how you thrive, not just survive in the face of significant shock. So thanks again for joining us in this holiday series. Listen, we love to hear your feedback. Drop over to www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Everything that you need is there. There's an option for you to support the podcast by buying me a wonderful black coffee. And if you don't want to do that, there's a little commentary down at the bottom. My email is there. That goes directly to me. Nobody else in the team in the production studio gets an opportunity to respond to that. I respond to each and every one of them. I appreciate your feedback. Please keep it coming. This podcast is free. It always will be. It's here. It's our community service. We want people to understand that preparedness is 100% within your reach, and it is not correlated to your socioeconomic status at all. And people, if you want to argue that with me, drop me a line at jeff@preparednesslabs.ca. Be happy to do that with you. Take care, enjoy your holiday season, and get ready for the next episode that'll be on the back shortly. Take care. Stay safe.